very special edition of Mind the Gap with me, Emma Turner, and my co-host, John Hutchinson. Hello, John.
Hello, Emma. How are you doing?
Well, slightly overwhelmed, completely intimidated, but very, very excited about our guest today.
I'm excited. The sun has come out recently, and I feel like it's a sign. It's like a blessing of this for our guest today that the sun is opening up. The all of a sudden the future is looking brighter. When we have Saeed to take us through.
Oh, wonderful. And funny enough, Saeed and I were just talking, Luke and I were just talking off air about the sunshine and how it's made us feel so much better this week. It's finally out. It's finally seems to be out of the grey. Sunshine is round the corner. But I do want to extend the very warmest of welcomes to our guest this morning, Saeed Atcha. It's been an absolute privilege to even get you on here. So very good morning. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you. I'm looking forward to having a chat and for you to grill me on on everything. I must say about the weather, given I'm based in Manchester, I'm quite surprised that we've actually had the sun because usually everywhere else gets it and we don't. So I'm fingers crossed that this is a sign of things to come.
Oh, marvellous. I went to university in Liverpool. I used to go to Manchester at the weekend. I went there pretty much every weekend for about 4 years. I have never, ever seen Manchester in the sunshine. I don't actually believe it actually ever comes out. Anyway, in terms of our conversation today, I've followed your work for quite a long time because I've been involved with Inspiring Leaders, which I know you're involved with as well. But for those people who haven't seen what you do, what your story is, the area of focus for your work, can you just give it, I say just, this is going to be the most detailed overview of everything you've ever done. What your story is, what your area of work is, and how you got into what you're doing today.
Cool. So I'll start at the very start. I was born in Bolton, very proud Boltonian. And I grew up for the majority of my life in and out of the care system here in the town, moving from residential to foster and all the different things in between, and eventually landing with kinship care, very kind of my uncle and grandma who took me in as a boisterous teenager. But I went to primary school in Bolton, went to secondary school in Bolton, and it was in secondary school really where things started to shift for me. So I was that young person that's always very inquisitive, the one that always asks why. Even though you can give me the best answer in the world and I'll follow it up with why. And that was something that just that inquisitive nature coupled with and I'm not sure where I got this from, a sense of duty, a sense of service, that as a 15-year-old, I decided to set up a charity. I didn't quite know that that was what it was going to be then, but I decided to set up a platform for young people to have their voices heard. And I'll come on to the story as to why, but that led to the establishment of Youth Leads UK, which I'm proudly serving as chief exec. And I've done lots of different things in between. I've served as a government social mobility commissioner under Prime Minister Theresa May and later Prime Minister Boris Johnson, and also served on a number of charity and public sector boards, so Social Housing Group and NHS Trust. So really developing lots of skills in the way of governance. And I currently serve as a Deputy Lieutenant of Greater Manchester, representing the Lord Lieutenant in the county, who is the King's personal representative. So we welcome new citizens on behalf of the King, lay wreaths on remembrance, and link the royal household to the community. The eyes and ears of the royal family. So it's been quite an incredible journey. I've done lots and lots of different things, but primarily my passion really is young people. And I've made a commitment that wherever life takes me, whether that be geography or career, I will always work on behalf of and with young people. So that's me in a nutshell. But I mean, there's lots we can go off from there.
John,
It sounds like a movie already. Your life sounds like a movie. Who would play you in the movie, Saeed?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, I just, I, I don't know. I mean, there's just so many people that have just come into mind. Um, and yeah, I haven't. Who would? Who? I'm trying to think. Someone who's young enough that still looks young that they can do the scenes of back when I was younger, but also someone who's got just a couple of greys. Uh, yeah, who could that be? Who could that be?
I mean, hearing your story and reading about your story, it sounds. I mean, you've obviously just been tremendously successful, and that duty and care and that kind of oozes out of you. But I'm also very aware that the sort of background upbringing, the kind of the care. We know that nationally, like statistically, um, like how things have ended up for you is not how things end up for many children and young people with that kind of story. um, I can hear that sense of like that's sort of what motivates you. But could you just share a little bit about kind of especially children growing up, looked after children within the care system, uh, what kind of outcomes look for that constituency, and how the work that you've been doing over the last decade, 2 decades has like what you've been focused on in terms of trying to improve things in that space.
So I was absolutely on that path, the typical path of a care experienced young person. You are more likely, sorry, to end up in prison than in higher education. That's a very sad but fact. Um, we often hear that phrase, "Your network is your net worth." As a 14, 15-year-old, my network was the network of local drug dealers. I was running drugs on the peripheries of criminal justice teams, and so yeah, the typical story, the typical path of a care experienced young person really does resonate with me. There is, I mean, there are so many challenges that young people in care face, particularly this big issue of belonging, and then what that translates into when you're constantly being moved. And I speak to young people and hear stories where by the time they're 6, they've already been 20 different homes. I mean, what does that do for one's stability? What does that do for one's purpose or feeling of being included in the world? And how many times has that young person been asked about decisions that are made for them? And it was all of that together that propelled me to want to do something different. So in 2011, when I was 15, um, it was it was quite a challenging time. It was pre 2011 riots, and I remember going to the shop before school, um, where I used to buy two energy drinks and a Boost chocolate bar. So it was never any wonder why I was in detention by the first break. Um, but to the left of me were all the newspapers, as they are in the news agents. Scum, feral animals, yobs, evil, threatening. They were all real headlines from the newspapers at the time of the 2011 riots that were describing me, describing my peers, describing, just essentially alienating a whole swathe of our population, that all young people are this. And I just sort of let that simmer, and went to school that day. Clearly, I was frustrated by something. My teachers picked up on that, my English teacher in particular, who um, was an absolutely life-changing person. And one thing she used to do was would see when I was annoyed and then say, just go and sit at the back of the classroom. So we had some computers there, and she went, you can either just open up a Word document and just type how you feel, or I'll give you some paper and a pen. Just write down what you're thinking, what you're feeling. And I'd never actually had that space. That was a very early introduction into journaling, but I'd never actually had that space just to think about what I think about, just to feel. And that day in particular, I wrote down all this about these newspaper headlines, how I felt like I was targeted, how I felt like that was where I was going to go as a young person. That was the ambition. That was, I was going to become this, this yob, this evil, this threatening young person. But actually, I don't want to. I don't want that, and I don't want that for my peers, and I don't want that for young people across the UK. So what can I do? And that was the big sort of question at the bottom of this piece of paper. I ended up writing all these things. What can I do? And I don't believe particularly in fate. I believe everything happens for a reason. And later that same day, my head of year, who I didn't really get on with, knocked on one of my science lessons and said, Saeed, I need you to step out for a minute. I just need to have a quick chat with you. And one of the things I was doing at the time was the school magazine. So I was editor of the school magazine. And my head of year pulled me out and said, Saeed, we need to stop the school magazine because you're in year 11 now. We need you to focus on grades. We need you to focus on your GCSEs. You need to get those exams. And I just thought, right, the only thing that's keeping me in school, the only thing, school was there. School was the only stable thing in my life. Everything else was chaos, complete, utter chaos. But school was stable. I really enjoyed the magazine. Why? Because I could ask why. I could go around asking teachers why. I'd interview teachers about what was going on in the school, why they've made decisions that they have, etc., etc. And the one thing I enjoyed doing was being taken away. And so I decided, literally about 10 minutes after that conversation, that I knew what I was going to do. And I decided that I wanted to set up a magazine that was bigger than the school, that would be part of the press and showcase all of the positive things that young people are doing. So I knew there was a change and I knew it had to be youth-led. So I managed to convince a group of friends who initially thought, here we go, here's another one of Saeed's great big ideas. But I said to them, look, we're going to set up a magazine. I didn't quite know how I was going to do it. Then the next day went into English again, and the teacher could see there was some cogs moving and said, Saeed, what's going on? And I said, well, the school magazine's being stopped, but I'm going to prove you wrong. I'm going to set up something that's bigger than just this school. And my teacher said to me, well, you're going to need some cash. How are you going to do it? And I had a phone at the time, which I think was still pretty rare back in 2011 for a year 11 to have a phone. I can't remember where I nicked it from, but it was on O2. And I wrote to O2 and said, here's my idea. Have you seen the press? You're a youth brand. Can you help? And they came back and offered support, financial support, to the tune of £300 initially. And my immediate thought was, how much weed can I buy with that? What can I sell it for? What's the profit margin? But very quickly, my English teacher and my friends brought me back. And we essentially, we held an away day, basically. We'd hired a meeting room in a community centre, got a load of young people together, and planned what this magazine was going to be, what this outlet for youth voice was going to be. And so went back to O2 and said, we've spent up, but here's the plan. It's 2012 soon, big Olympic year. We've got Amir Khan, who's in Bolton. We want him on the front cover. We had somebody from Bolton who was very far down the X Factor route. And we said, we want them on the front cover as well. And so we went back and sent all of this across, and the chief exec of O2 came back and said, but I knew £300 wasn't going to be a lot to get you started, but I knew it was going to give you the motivation to do it. Here's £2,500, and here's one of my senior HR bods to be your mentor. I mean, what an incredibly incredibly life-changing moments. I'm a huge advocate for mentorship, a huge advocate for schools working with businesses, a huge advocate for actually giving power, purpose, and belief to young people that they, no matter what age, can set up what they want and do what they want. Um, and that propelled my life into so many different directions. So, doing the magazine, as it just was a magazine for a number of years, I then started to get bits of recognition, became Young Person of the Year for the local newspaper, and I started to get recognised. And there was then a national charity called Step Up to Serve, which ran a campaign called the I Will campaign. And the I Will campaign was set up by the then Prince of Wales, our current king, to double the number of children and young people participating in social action. So volunteering, campaigning, fundraising. And I became an ambassador of that charity and eventually a trustee serving on the board of a national movement, which just opened my eyes to so much. I thought, my goodness me, I've got power. I'm 17 and I'm a trustee of a national charity where I can see board papers with millions of pounds written on them and names like the Prince of Wales and things like that. And it was just incredible. And I met His Royal Highness Prince of Wales a number of times as a trustee and ambassador of that charity, and actually hosted an event for him at St James's Palace, where I'm not sure if you'll be able to superimpose images on this on the podcast, but I'll send you the images and you can see there's a fantastic image, and I always caption it with "Speaking truth to power." And it's an image of me stood up on this front table in this grand ballroom. I'm stood up hosting this event, and our king is watching me and listening. And what that does for one's motivation to do more is immeasurable. And it really did propel me to do more. So I became trustee of so many different organisations, to small, ultra-local back home in Bolton, to national, regional organisations. We transformed our magazine into what is now known as Youth Leads UK. It's a charity that supports over 2,500 young people every year access social action opportunities. We still produce the magazine. It goes out to 36 secondary schools, every Asda store in Greater Manchester, Starbucks stores, wherever we can get it, we'll get it. We have a street team that hands it out in our towns and in our cities in the north. So it's a fantastic organisation. I'm so pleased to still lead. You don't set something up as a 15-year-old thinking it's going to be a permanent fixture. Where I'm now getting people I went to school with who've got children asking about whether they can join our programs. So it's quite bizarre, but I absolutely love it. So I did all of that. As I said, started to get recognition. Got me into rooms I never knew even existed. So became a US UK young leader. Went out on a visit to the USA. Worked with the ambassador, Barack Obama's ambassador to the UK for a couple of years. I stepped down when Trump became president the first time. I mean, that's a whole story that we either can or won't go into. I became Government Social Mobility Commissioner. I received an MBE from Her late Majesty the Queen in 2019, the youngest person on the list that year. And later that year was appointed as a deputy lieutenant representing ultimately the royal family in Greater Manchester. So it's quite a people talk about non-linear journeys. I think that's probably what that isn't.
It's just like John said, it's almost filmic in its in its structuring. It's fabulous. But I'm just thinking, Saeed, there is something almost prophetic about what you were buying in that shop. You were buying a boost, my goodness me, you get, which has led to a boost for all children, and you're buying that energy drink, which is kind of testament to your own personal drive in pushing all of this forward. But I'm thinking there are children sitting in classrooms today who have gone to the newsagents on the way and who have bought their equivalent of a boost or an energy bar and are feeling equally potentially frustrated with their situation or the state of the country or their local area. And it's interesting that you had two interactions with adults in the school. One who sat you down and said, what's in your head? And one said, you just need to focus on this. You can't. So one who said, let me listen to you. One who said, you can't. So to kind of open the door to more children to take action in the way that you did, who are currently sitting in our classrooms, what do teachers need to do?
As much connection to the community as possible. Equipping young people with the belief that they can actually make a difference. And by starting small, and I don't think you'll find a school in the country that doesn't do any form of social action. You know, simple things like the non-uniform days, and you know, the fundraising, the campaigning, the projects, etc., etc. As long as the learners understand the why are they bringing in £1? What is then the impact of that social action that they have undertaken? That's a cracking start, because it's something you're already doing. It's just equipping those young people understanding why. It's not just so you can come in whatever clothing you want. Actually, you're making this difference because you're helping this charity, and often it's your BBC Children in Needs, your Comic Reliefs. Sometimes it's the local charities, it's local hospice. So are you getting people in from the hospice on that same day, talking about the impact of where that funding goes? So really just broadening young people's understanding of what that social action that already happens is. So that's one thing. Another thing is introducing more in the way of social action, i.e., could there be well, I'm not going to give you the idea. You get the ideas from the young people. You ask them what is frustrating them in their communities, and it might be a litter problem. So what can you do? You can organise a community litter pick. You can organise an education initiative around littering. It might be that. It might be pollution. It might be the traffic around the school, which, goodness me, that's always a problem in communities. So really understanding from the learners what it is that annoys them, what it is that frustrates them, and what they care about. And you'll find actually that we have a really caring generation of children and young people. And one of the reasons for that is because, look, they have access to more knowledge than any generation before them. So much more in the way of knowledge that is on a handheld device in their pocket, that they go home and scroll TikTok and find out things that are happening on the other side of the world that we would never have that opportunity growing up. So they're a lot more our young people are a lot more global. They're a lot more attuned to global issues. They're also a lot more caring, purely because of this access to the knowledge earlier. So that, I mean, there's a lot. There's a huge amount that teachers and educators can do to really just pick out, as I say, what the things are that those young people are passionate about changing. And you start from that's your starting point. Then you start to plan what those projects might be, and you start to build that habit of social action as early as possible, so that then you don't have some of the issues in society that we've got today. You start to build that whole thing around tolerance, around, I mean, just the littering, for example. There's tons of studies that show where children are involved in litter picks that 5-10 years it becomes less and less of a problem. So there's a lot of research that points towards why social action works and what can be done. And I would implore teachers to look up Step Up to Serve, the I Will campaign, the I Will movement, because there are pick up and go lesson plans. There's all sorts of case studies from schools that have really taken. There's one school, it's a school or a trust, I can't quite remember, based up in Cumbria, and they just took a whole a whole curriculum approach to social action. So the mathematics was all about everything was project based. So they do a project budget in maths, for example. In English, they'd write to the MP. In science, it was a climate thing, so they'd do that stuff there. In PE, they went out and did. So I think it was a running litter pick. So there was I wouldn't like to have done the risk assessment, but there was a running litter pick. So there's all sorts of things that they were able just to weave into what they're already doing, and that's the hardest thing is getting started, isn't it? And if you're already doing stuff, how do you enhance what you're doing rather than saying, oh well, here's an entirely new curriculum, off you go. That's going to be a bit harder for teachers and school leaders to bring in. So that's what I'd say. Speak to young people, find out what they're passionate about, and start from there.
Say, can we go back to that teacher in the movie that I'm writing in my head currently? The screenplay's almost finished. I'll get it to you by the end of the podcast. The teacher who shut down the paper, they're definitely they're the villain of the story. That would be, that's the end of Act 1 into Act 2. That's the making the making of you. But I'm trying to, can I test this with you? Because I'm going to try and do the sympathetic to the villain thing.
Yeah.
I could imagine that teacher has looked at the data around care experienced children, and they know that, as you said, their chances of getting to HE are not strong.
Yeah.
So it may be thinking, the best thing that I can do, the most compassionate thing I can do for Saeed is really help him to get a great set of grades. He's going to be so screwed without them.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to try and do a bit of tough love here, and I'm going to take away his favorite thing.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to imagine, maybe that was, maybe that wasn't. But when you look back at that moment now, how do you feel towards that teacher? How do you feel towards that decision? How do you feel about that moment?
So in the moment, obviously I was annoyed, frustrated, and that carried with me for a couple of years. And it was only actually when I went back to school as a governor that I interacted with that teacher again. And I said, look, I understand where you were coming from. You're there to help me be the best I can. And in your eyes, that's getting the best grades, which opens up the doors. So I completely get it. And we have a bit of a funny relationship now, in that she says, Saeed, the joke's on me now. And then I said, yeah, but if you didn't, would I have done... I threw it back. I said, if you didn't do that, would I have done what I did? And she said, I've no doubt you would have done it, but would you have done it so quick? I thought, okay, yeah, all right. So we're at peace. Yeah, we're at peace. I think and that teacher is an absolutely brilliant person. And I get why she did what she did. Has my story changed the way she does things now? I don't think she'd mind if I say yes. I think she's a bit more measured in her approach to things like this. And actually, she saw the benefit of social action and really drives it, and is now the careers and aspirations lead within the school, which she wasn't back then. So, I think it worked. It worked for everybody. Had I not been me, and had that been another care experienced young person that had another opportunity taken away from them, that may have actually gone the other way. And that's what worries me, and that's why I say a bit more measured now. But it's hard because teaching staff, they don't get a guidebook on how to deal with care experienced young people. They don't have... I've got a lot of not sympathy is probably the wrong word. A lot of understanding when it comes to the decisions that school staff have to make, because it's not easy. You're dealing with really volatile teenagers. And sometimes even younger, who've got untold amounts of chaos that the vast majority of us typically have had no experience of. and that in itself is a challenge. You know, there's things that those children and those young people have gone through that you wouldn't wish on your worst enemy. So just having a little bit of compassion goes a long way. And I feel really bad because I don't have answers on how, because looked after children and children in care are not just one group. You know, every child is different, and you can't treat them all the same. You know, they might be in care because of abuse. They might be in care because a parent is in prison. They might be in care because a parent is not well enough to look after the child. There's all sorts, and each of those different things often plays to different outcomes for those children and young people. So it's not easy. It's really difficult, and often those young people end up excluded in AP, or they end up in PRUs.
Is it then about schools becoming a place, or like a lighthouse, like a beacon for children, all children, not just children who are care experienced, but that they are there and they are constant and they are a safe place to go to, and they are a place of the opposite of volatility. They are a place of stability and safety and predictability.
Yeah,
Is it that all children will benefit from, regardless of their route through to the gates that morning?
100%, and I would add in happiness to that.
I'm so glad you said that, because whenever I go into school, sometimes they're very orderly and very calm and very purposeful, but they're a little bit like the Dementors have been in, and the soul seems to have been sucked out the place. And so happiness and joy and a sense of
Yeah,
just a nice place to be
yeah,
is so important as well, isn't it?
yeah, 100%. And I as much of that we can get spread across all of our schools, the better for all young people. You know,
Mm.
the challenges seem to be more and more. You know, there are a class of 30 where there's 28 different first languages. So there's so many challenges in schools, but the basics, as long as we get the basics right, that strength, that stability, that lighthouse, the beacon, the happiness. There's so many children who just don't have that, you know,
Mhm.
when at home. So to have that is massively important. But that also says a lot in the way of combating disruption, and how I think strict is probably the wrong word because people have different meanings of strict, and the same with order. But there needs to be a certain level of order, and you know, behavioural accountability there as well, because if your school is chaos, where is that young person ever going to find any stability? So I always try and look at what the alternative is, and that then focuses what we need to do. But yeah, the school where I was at, Ladybridge High School in Bolton, I wanted to go back to because it did so much for me. And that's why I went back as a governor and eventually was vice chair of governors for a number of years. Put a new head in, really looked at the social action curriculum, the connection to communities. You know, we've got children from the school now taking part in our cadet services for the first time. We've got them accompanying deputy lieutenants and civic leaders when it comes to laying wreaths. They attend the mayor making ceremonies in the town hall. They're just a lot more connected to
Mm.
the community that they are based in. And every school should be. It is a community facility, isn't it?
Mhm.
There's two bits I think from that, Saeed, that I'm really interested in exploring further with you. So maybe I'll throw them both at you, and you can pick which one you'd like to kind of explore. One is this idea of kind of place-based and community pride, and you mentioned kind of belonging, and schools really feeling like sort of hubs of the community, anchors within the community, get like being connected really meaningfully to the community. And it sounded like you think that is really important, and share and maybe sharing some ideas of how that could happen. But the second bit is this, what's really coming through, and I think is so inspiring about your story, is this sense of entrepreneurship that you demonstrated, that I could imagine for lots of children, and potentially lots of children that traditionally don't succeed or enjoy school, this ability to kind of focus on entrepreneurship, on sort of skills development, on that seems like it was hugely motivating for you. As you said, you had 300 quid that you could spend either on weed or on a paper, and you chose to spend it on your paper. And that sort of really is the fork in the road, isn't it? And it sounds like that sense of ownership was a big part of that. And there is a sense, I think, in schools, lots of teenagers that I speak to in schools, particularly, very, very interested in developing these life skills, these career skills, this sorts of sense of wanting to be set up as an adult, which is a little bit counter to schools are there to focus on academic subjects and kind of you'll sort the rest out later on. So two bits there, the kind of place-based opportunity for schools, and then also this idea of kind of entrepreneurship and sort of skills development. And I know you thought about both of them. I'd love to just get your feelings on each of those.
I'll tackle the entrepreneurship piece first, and I think there is a world where entrepreneurship alongside the whole academic piece can live quite harmoniously together. I did get all my grades. I was not on track to get them, but actually doing the magazine and all the prep and all the rest of it got me to the point where I was able to get those grades, because as I say, maths was all about project budgets. I'd never drawn up a balance sheet. I didn't know what it was. But actually doing the project budgets, applying for funding, etc., that helped with my maths. Persuasive writing. I was filling in funding bids as a 15-year-old, having to persuade funders to back something, and I was using what I've learned in school, but also then that whole application of the theory, able to recall it, etc. So the entrepreneurship can serve as a tool in a teacher's toolbox. Project-based learning is a way to get to that endpoint of academic success. I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that. The whole thing around life skills and career readiness, for me, yes, it should be part of school. It should be part of growing up. I mean, I don't think things like brushing teeth should be part of school. I think it's a sad fact that schools are having to teach things like that. But absolutely life skills in terms of career readiness, how to use the things you learn in school. Yes, of course that makes sense. But the entrepreneurship bit for me that was most important was that sense of purpose. I was given a sense of purpose. I was able to understand what my purpose in the world was. And that's a big, big thing when it comes to children and young people not understanding what their purpose is. And they see an incredibly, as I say, because they've got access to so much knowledge and information far earlier than they ought to, I believe. There is this distinct lack of, well, where do I fit in all of this? They might not be able to express it in those terms, but that's what's going on. Where do I fit in all of this? I've got opinions, I've got thoughts, what can I do? So anything that helps you drive purpose, which then in turn drives belonging and inclusion. Everybody craves a purpose. We all need one. So I hope that's addressed the entrepreneurship piece and what my thoughts are on that. Place-based schools as hubs, absolutely, absolutely. In the past 10, 15 years, you've seen an absolute, I was going to be quite flagrant in my language. There has been a decrease in the number of community hubs, and places where communities get together, where communities meet. And actually, you look at the more successful parts of the world, our world here in the UK, where cohesion is working really well, is where schools are acting as community hubs. So you've got a building there, you've got a fantastic facility that should be open on a weekend. That should be open in the evenings. The local old ladies group, you could be using that on a weekend. I think of some of the schools in the borough where I live, and that's what schools are used for. The football pitches are rented out in an evening. There's income for the school there. It pays for the security, it pays for all the rest of it. And then when you start to bring in the learners to that, there's a whole host of intergenerational activity going on, where members of our older people's charities, Age UK, etc., where they've got these community groups based in schools, and the school children are also part of it on the weekend. There's nothing that can go wrong with that. That's just enrichment. That's the extracurricular enrichment, just by opening the building on a weekend, just by inviting the community in. Because I think the vast majority of the public see schools already as hubs, and as places that can act as community hubs. It just brings me to that phrase, you don't know what you don't know. So as much as you can do to expose children and young people to any sort of social action and activity that benefits them and the community, the better.
I'm just going to pick up on that. You don't know what you don't know, because you know a lot, because you sit across so many aspects of a young person's lived experience. You're working with the healthcare system, you're working with finance organisations, you're working with educational organisations. So I kind of wanted to ask, what are the biggest challenges that education potentially needs to be aware of that are facing young people that might not come directly from education itself, but kind of those overarching big themes that are coming through that are unique to this generation, because teachers are not the same generation, obviously, as the children that they are teaching.
Yeah.
And we don't necessarily know what that lived experience is like for those young people. So are there things that are coming through that are unique to this group, this generation, that teachers would be mindful to be aware of, but that might not have cropped up yet in educational discourse?
I think one of the biggest things is technology. That's something that comes up time and time again. And how does that impact on career readiness? How does that impact on life skills, etc.? And I think that there are certain things that I call muscles. There are certain skills or traits that I call muscles, and they are things like purpose, things like resilience, that AI can't do resilience. AI can't do purpose. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is, how do we get the education system to think more about, okay, what can technology replace, and how do we equip young people to be able to use that effectively? And then how do we go absolutely hell for leather on the stuff that AI can't replace, because that's what's going to set these people apart. So I think that's the biggest challenge. I think we're also seeing, the business world tells me all the time that young people are leaving the education system not ready for the working world. They don't know how to pick a phone up. They don't know how to have a conversation with somebody. They don't know how to send an email. All the things that we're expected to do in the employed world every day. And I actually said to an employer quite recently, I said, I'm very surprised, because I learned how to write an email in primary school. And then I asked one of my cousins, who's 9, and he said, no, we don't learn how to do that. we have email addresses, but we don't know how to use them. And I thought, well, that's quite interesting. So that's, that's it's all anecdotal. I don't have stats for this, but it indicates that there is a bit of a deeper concern around if we're not getting those basics right. Employers are then finding it difficult. The government wants to drive growth. Well, if employers are spending a year training somebody on something that employers think should already have been done in the education system, then you're already stalling growth, aren't you? So I think there's a lot the government has to answer for in this sort of arena. How does it equip the education sector with the right know-how, skills, cash, projects, etc., to kickstart some of this stuff so that people are more ready to enter the working world to drive that growth quicker. And then you look at the university sector. So I'm currently on the board at Manchester Metropolitan University, and I've worked with a number of universities, and we are seeing a steady decrease in the number of home students applying, which is a big concern. And I don't quite know we've got the answers exactly as to why, but I think we need to be doing as much as we can to ask young people why they're not thinking about university. I mean, you always get the answer around the cost and the debt and all the rest of it. So what's the alternative to that? Degree apprenticeships. Your degree's paid for you, you still get a degree, and you earn whilst you learn, and there's no end to the vacancies in terms of degree apprenticeships. But do enough careers advisors know about that? And if you've got careers advisors in schools who the last time they applied for a job themselves was 25 years ago, I'll leave that there.
It's an interesting trend, and I was in secondary schools last week actually, and was chatting to children in lessons, and I was quite surprised. And that every single child that I spoke to, I said, "What are you planning on doing? When you leave in 16, they didn't have sixth forms," and every single one said they wanted to do an apprenticeship. Every single child, and I did ask. I was in a room with a room full of senior leaders the next day, and I said, "Is this reflective? Like, I'm quite surprised to hear this. I would have expected a bigger range." And they said, "Absolutely." And they said they're hearing a lot more, "I just want to start earning straight away," and they heard a lot more. The cost of university just sounds very scary to them, and not the kind of guaranteed return on investment that they think. Now it might be, if we look over the life course, graduates versus non-graduates, it might be or it might not be, but certainly the perception of young people is this isn't going to guarantee me a well-paid job straight away afterwards. I'm going to have this huge amount of debt, and whether that's real debt or sort of not real debt doesn't really matter to them. They see that number.
I completely agree, and from my time as Social Mobility Commissioner, I'm a bit out of step with the statistics, so do forgive me if this is wrong. But as far as I can remember, your earning power is something like 4.2 times more if you're from a wealthier background than somebody who is from a lower socioeconomic background. Both gone through university, both with a degree. The earning power. So that to me then comes down to these soft skills, which are actually life skills. Does a young person from a lower socioeconomic background know how to negotiate? Do they know how to public speaking, confidence, the whole sort of thing that the independent sector does incredibly well, and a lot of our state schools are now trying to do more of, the debate clubs, etc., etc. So that's one thing, but also the point about earnings and return on investment, etc. I think that, again, this whole access to knowledge, this whole access to information, and what children hear at home, when parents are finding it very difficult to cover the very basics at the moment, that parents will play a huge part in a young person's decision as to what they want to do after school. And if parents are saying you just need to be earning because going to university is not going to, life's difficult as it is, it's going to cost you this if you move out, etc., etc. So I think that is an issue. We had an 11-year-old come to us as the cost of living really started to bite, 18 months or so ago, and said that they wanted to get a job so they could help their mum pay the electricity. And I just thought, when did we stop allowing children to be children? Yeah, that is worrying. So how do we navigate out of that? Is a whole other question that we could do an hour on, at least. But I think that parents really are driving the whole apprenticeship conversation because of necessity. I think that's a huge part of it. People just don't feel like they can afford to go to university.
As you say, we could dig into that for another hour, but I know Luke's going to come on in a minute and start telling me off about going over. So I'm just going to finish off, Saeed, by saying an opportunity to platform the work of Youth Leads UK, a chance for you to finish off by telling us a little bit more about your baby, really.
Yeah, of course. Youth Leads is an incredibly fantastic organisation that is there to equip young people with the skills to take on the world. We run a number of leadership programs across the Northwest in particular. We're not just confined to the Northwest, but that's where most of our work is. Young people come on our programs for, it's a 12-week program, one night a week. As part of that, they get a whole host of skills development opportunities. They get 4 connections to employers, which includes mentoring, networking, etc., and site visits. That whole thing around you don't know what you don't know. We're taking them out to the big tall buildings that they see and wonder what's behind the front door. That's one area to what we do. Raising youth voice is another area. We do that through our magazine. We do that through connecting young people with decision makers. So, for example, we have a civic youth steering group that meets with our mayor in Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, on a regular basis, where he hears what young people care about, what things he can do as a policy maker, as a decision maker. And I mean, we've had some fantastic results from what young people have told him. And if we've got time, I will go through one of them now. When he was on his first campaign trail before he was first elected as mayor, he came to visit Youth Leads and met a number of our young people who were absolutely incandescent about transport in Greater Manchester, how to get from home to an opportunity that was 3 towns away. It would be something like 2 different trams and 3 buses, and it would cost them in excess of £15 to get to an apprentice, which back then paid £2.50 an hour. That, what he heard from our young people and other fantastic young people in our region, meant that one of the very first things he did was create an opportunity pass for 16 to 18-year-olds, which was free bus travel across the whole of our 10 towns and cities. So really breaking down those barriers to opportunity. And there's so much more like that he's done as a direct result of what young people have told him. So we work with decision makers across the UK because it's not, if politicians haven't worked with young people before, if decision makers haven't worked with young people before, it's fair to say that they don't know how. And so we act as a bridge for the young person, equipping them with how to deal with decision makers, because they're quite an interesting bunch, and also decision makers, how best to listen to and act on what young people are saying. We also translate that into a school context. So how do we connect the school's learning body, the learners, with the school's governance function, the board, whether that be MAT board, school board, etc. Is there co-opted membership on the school governing board of the actual learners? Are young people actually having a say on the board of governors? Is the board of governors, when they get a business case from the head teacher talking about why there needs to be a new building or needs to do something, alongside that, is there the learner case that's written by young people about why they want something? So there's little things that we can do to support schools better understand the importance of youth voice and also think about how they can embed it with a whole school approach. When I say whole school approach, there's we went into a school where we we basically, they had a school council, bit tick boxy popularity contest. The person that gets the most votes wins, and they become head boy, head girl, etc. We smashed that to pieces and created a bit more of an equitable model. But the whole school approach started with, what are the values that are going to govern the youth voice in this school? And young people came up with that, as did the dinner staff, as did the cleaners, as did the secretaries. It's a whole school approach. Everybody's part of that. How do we govern it? And so we came up with the values, and we tried to bridge that gap between teachers and students. So there's a lot we do. There's a lot on our website, youthleads.uk. And if there's something that anybody's interested in talking more about, then you can contact us through the website and social media. We're on all social media where young people are. So if you're also on TikTok, you can find us there, Youth Leads UK.
I am desperately hoping that you are inundated. Absolutely inundated.
I may regret.
No, I genuinely think that if any schools listen to this, they would be completely barking mad not to pursue that line of inquiry. And just before we say goodbye, Saeed, there's a quote that's on your website on the front page that says about children being 22% of the population and 100% of the future. And I think that that's something that we need to bear in mind as educators, but also on behalf of all those children's lives that you are changing and minds that you are changing. Thank you so much for the work you do, Saeed. It's obviously changing lives, changing trajectories for young people. So thank you so much for the time and energy that you give to the projects. And also thank you so much for joining us today.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Emma. Thank you, John. And thank you, Luke, for making things run so smoothly. I look forward to catching up again.
We'd be delighted. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Saeed.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. I'm Emma Turner and I've been presenting with my co-host John Hutchinson. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review, share on social media and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on our YouTube channel by searching Mind the Gap with John and Emma, or head over to Spotify for an audio version. This podcast was produced in association with Haringey Education Partnership and our producer is Luke Kemper.